For 20 years, women have been told that taking hormones for menopause will cause breast cancer. But what if the study that started this massive panic was completely flawed? Today, we are exposing the biggest medical mistake in women's health. This video is for educational purposes only. Hormone replacement therapy, HRT, requires a thorough evaluation. Always consult with a board-certified endocrinologist, OB/GYN, or functional medicine practitioner before starting or stopping any hormone treatments, especially if you have a history of hormone receptor-positive cancers. And I want to say this gently right at the start. If you are exhausted, overheated, anxious, foggy, and not sleeping, your suffering is real. You are not weak. You are not just anxious. You are living through a profound endocrine transition. For many women, menopause did not begin as a quiet transition. It began with a warning that hormones were dangerous, a warning that relief might be followed by cancer, a warning that it was safer to white-knuckle through hot flashes, insomnia, brain fog, and bone loss than to ask for help. And that fear changed lives. Women delayed treatment. Women suffered in silence. Women were told to be brave while their sleep, mood, libido, and vitality slipped away. But bravery should never mean being left uninformed. Menopause is not just about comfort. It is about brain function, sleep quality, bone preservation, and long-term health. Hormone therapy remains the most effective treatment for hot flashes and has been shown to prevent bone loss and fracture. Here is the part so many women were never told clearly. The fear did not come from menopause itself. It came from the way one giant study was translated into public panic. The Women's Health Initiative enrolled women ages 50 to 79 with a mean age of 63, meaning many participants were well past the early menopause window, when hormone therapy is typically considered most favorable. That matters because timing matters, age matters, years since menopause matter. The body of a woman who is newly menopausal is not the same as the body of a woman who is more than a decade past that transition. When a study ignores that difference, the headlines can become louder than the biology. Today's medical guidance is far more nuanced than the fear women inherited in 2002. The Menopause Society says hormone therapy is the most effective treatment for vasomotor symptoms and genitourinary syndrome of menopause, and that for most healthy symptomatic women younger than 60 and within 10 years of menopause onset, the benefits outweigh the risks. It also notes that transdermal routes and lower doses may decrease the risk of venous thromboembolism and stroke. That is not a promise that hormone therapy is right for everyone. It is a reminder that medicine is supposed to be individualized, not ruled by a single fear-based headline. The real question is never, are hormones good or bad? The real question is, which hormone, which route, which timing, and which woman? So in this masterclass, I am not asking you to trust hype. I am asking you to trust biology. In the next chapter, we will open the trial itself and look at what was actually studied, what hormones were used, and why that distinction changed the lives of millions of women. Because when you understand the difference between a study design and a human body, the fear starts to lose its power. And if you have been told for years that suffering is just the price of getting older, I want you to hear this clearly. You deserve a better explanation than that. Menopause is not a disease, it is a transition, and with the right evaluation, the right timing, and the right support, many women can move through it with far more ease than they were ever told was possible. Let's look at the study itself, because this is where the story changes. The Women's Health Initiative was a massive, government-funded trial designed to look at long-term disease prevention in postmenopausal women, not a symptom relief trial for women in the first years after menopause. In the combined hormone arm, women with a uterus were given oral, conjugated equine estrogens, 0.625 milligrams per day, plus medroxyprogesterone acetate, 2.5 mg per day. That is a very specific drug combination, and it matters because if you do not know what was actually studied, you cannot honestly generalize the results to every hormone strategy women use today. Here is the first fatal flaw. The average age of the women in the WHI hormone trials was about 63. That means many were not newly menopausal. Many were already years past the transition. And that matters because the body does not respond to hormones the same way at 52, at 63, or a decade after menopause has already reshaped metabolism, arteries, and tissue responsiveness. Modern menopause guidance now emphasizes timing. For most healthy symptomatic women younger than 60, and within 10 years of menopause onset, benefits and risks look very different than they do in older populations. So when people say, the study proved hormones are dangerous, that is already too simplistic. What the WHI actually studied was an older, more heterogeneous population, using one particular oral regimen, with outcomes focused on chronic disease prevention. The trial was also stopped early after risk signals emerged. In the combined estrogen-progestin arm, that does not mean the result was imaginary. It means the result was specific to that population, that route, and that formulation. And it should never have been translated into a universal fear of all menopausal hormone therapy. Now let's talk about the hormones themselves. The estrogen used in the WHI was conjugated equine estrogen, which is not the same thing as human estradiol. The progestogen used was medroxyprogesterone acetate, a synthetic progestin, not natural progesterone. That distinction is not cosmetic. It is biochemical. FDA-approved bioidentical options include estradiol and micronized progesterone, which are chemically identical to the hormones the human body makes. The WHI did not test that kind of matched, bioidentical approach. And that is why the headlines were so devastating. The public did not hear nuance. They heard danger. But medicine is supposed to ask harder questions than the headline asks. Was the timing appropriate? Was the population representative? Were the hormones biologically matched? Were the findings about one drug combination or about every hormone option a woman might use? When you ask the right questions, the story becomes much more precise and much less terrifying. This was not a verdict on all hormone therapy. It was a warning about overgeneralizing one study into a lifetime of fear. When you understand that distinction, the whole conversation changes. The fear was never just about estrogen. It was about a specific trial, a specific age group, and a specific synthetic regimen being spoken about as if it represented every woman's hormone physiology. In the next chapter, we will open the lock and key biology and show why bioidentical hormones and synthetic progestins do not behave the same way inside the body. Now we get to the metaphor that makes this easy to understand. The lock and key. Your hormone receptors are not vague suggestions. They are highly specific molecular docking sites. A hormone has to fit the receptor in a very particular way in order to signal the body correctly. That is why hormone therapy is not one single thing. It is a category, and inside that category, there are very different molecules with very different behaviors. When people say, "But hormones are hormones," that is like saying all keys open the same lock. They do not. Chemistry decides the fit. Chemistry decides the message. Chemistry decides whether the body receives a familiar signal or a distorted one. Bioidentical hormones are the ones that match human hormones in chemical and molecular structure. The Endocrine Society notes that bioidentical hormones are compounds with exactly the same chemical and molecular structure as hormones produced in the human body, and that some FDA-approved hormone preparations are bioidentical. In menopause care, the commonly discussed examples are estradiol and micronized progesterone. That distinction matters because a hormone that matches human physiology can be studied, dosed, and monitored in a much more predictable way than a custom mixture that has never been tested in a rigorous clinical trial. Even major societies caution that compounded bioidentical preparations are not the same thing as FDA-approved bioidentical products, and they raise concerns about dosing, purity, and consistency. Now compare that with the WHI progestin. The WHI used medroxyprogesterone acetate, which is a synthetic progestin. Progestins are synthetic progestogens, and they are not all interchangeable with progesterone. They can differ in structure, receptor binding, and downstream effects. Small chemical changes can produce meaningful differences in how these compounds interact with progesterone, androgen, glucocorticoid, and mineralocorticoid receptors. That is the real science behind the lock and key. A synthetic molecule may still open something, but it may also press other buttons along the way. It may behave differently in the brain, breast, blood vessels, and liver. So when women were told the WHI results proved all hormones are dangerous, the truth was far more specific. The trial tested one oral estrogen plus one synthetic progestin in an older population, not every hormone strategy ever created. And here is why many women feel vindicated when they finally learn this. Natural progesterone is not just a weaker copy of something else. It is a distinct hormone with its own pharmacology. Reviews describe unique effects of progesterone compared with synthetic progestins, including different receptor interactions and different nervous system metabolites. Micronized progesterone can be FDA approved, and it is not the same thing as a compounded cream, pellet, or random bioidentical blend. That does not mean every woman should take it. It means the conversation has to become intelligent again. The question is not whether women should blindly take hormones. The question is whether the molecule is matched to the biology, the route is appropriate, and the person is properly screened and monitored. So the real lesson of the lock and key model is not that one hormone is magical and another is evil. The lesson is that structure changes function. A molecule that is chemically identical to what the human body expects is not the same as a synthetic molecule designed for a different pharmaceutical purpose. When women understand that, they stop fearing the word hormone and start asking a better question. Which hormone? In what form? For which body? At what time? That is the beginning of informed menopause care. Now let's talk about something women feel in their bodies long before they can explain it in medical language. The stress load. Menopause is not happening in a vacuum. If you are already running on too little sleep, too much pressure, and too many responsibilities, every hot flash feels hotter, every night feels longer, and every symptom feels louder. That is not imaginary. Stress physiology and sleep disruption can intensify menopausal symptoms and make them harder to tolerate. So yes, the hormone conversation is important, but so is the terrain that hormones are moving through. A woman in menopause is not just low on estrogen, she may also be depleted by chronic stress, fragmented sleep, and a nervous system that has been pushed too hard for too long. That is why the best plan is never one-dimensional. Here's the medically responsible way to say it. Hormone therapy may be part of the solution, but it is not the only piece of the puzzle. The Menopause Society states that transdermal routes and lower doses may decrease the risk of venous thromboembolism and stroke, and that for many healthy symptomatic women younger than 60 and within 10 years of menopause onset, hormone therapy can be an effective option. But even the best hormone plan works better when sleep, stress, movement, and nutrition are also addressed. And this is where I want you to work with your endocrinologist, your OB/GYN, or a clinician who understands hormone nuance, not just panic headlines. The goal is not to push any one treatment. The goal is to build a physiology that can tolerate the transition instead of being overwhelmed by it. Some women also want non-hormonal support while they are deciding about HRT or while they are stabilizing their routine. That is where botanical support can play a lifestyle role, but only as an adjunct, never as a substitute for proper care. For example, NCCIH notes that some ashwagandha preparations may help with stress and insomnia, but the evidence is not conclusive, and evidence is insufficient for menopause specifically. So if you hear me talk about a botanical support formula like MenoRescue, hear it in the right context, not as a hormone replacement, not as a cure, and not as a promise. Think of it as a non-hormonal support tool that may help some women create a calmer internal baseline while they work on the bigger picture with a qualified clinician. The reason that matters is simple. When your body is under strain, everything feels more fragile. Sleep gets lighter, hot flashes feel more disruptive, mood gets more reactive, and the body becomes less forgiving of poor decisions, poor timing, and poor guidance. You do not need perfection. You need support. You need clarity. You need a plan that respects both the endocrine system and the nervous system. That is why any menopause strategy should include an honest conversation about symptom severity, cardiovascular risk, breast cancer history, bone loss, and the stressors that are amplifying the picture. So here is the message I want you to take from this chapter. Hormones are not the whole story, but stress biology is not a side note either. For many women, the most successful menopause plan is the one that combines evidence-based hormone care, if appropriate, with foundational support for sleep and stress. That is how you stop surviving menopause and start navigating it with more steadiness. And again, work with your endocrinologist for HRT and never let a supplement replace a proper medical evaluation. Let's bring this all together. For decades, women were taught to fear the very thing that may have been taken from them too quickly, too broadly, and with too little nuance: thoughtful hormone care. But menopause is not a moral failure, not a collapse, and not a sentence to years of suffering. It is a biological transition, and transitions can be supported. If your symptoms are severe, hot flashes, night sweats, insomnia, brain fog, anxiety, bone loss, you deserve a serious evaluation, not dismissal. You deserve a clinician who understands timing, formulation, route, risk factors, and your personal history. That may mean discussing FDA-approved estradiol, progesterone, or non-hormonal tools. The point is not to force one answer. The point is to restore choice. And I want to say this clearly: you do not need to keep suffering in silence just because a headline scared the entire world. The WHI shaped a generation of fear, but fear is not the same thing as physiology. When you look carefully at the study design, the timing, and the hormones used, you realize why so many women were left with a conclusion that was much broader than the data could honestly support. That is why education matters, because informed women make better decisions, ask better questions, and get better care. If you are navigating menopause now, the best next step is not panic. It is assessment. It is lab work when appropriate. It is reviewing your cardiovascular risk, breast cancer history, bone health, sleep, stress, and symptom burden with someone qualified to guide you. Supportive lifestyle tools can matter too: sleep regularity, protein intake, resistance training, stress reduction, and carefully chosen botanicals may help create a steadier foundation while you and your clinician decide what else belongs in your plan. That is the spirit behind a supportive formula like MenoRescue. Not magic, not replacement, not a cure, but a botanical adjunct that may help some women feel more grounded while they work on the bigger endocrine picture. Think of it as part of the environment, not the engine. The engine is your medical care. The environment is everything that helps that care work more smoothly. So here is the final truth I want to leave you with. Menopause is not a disease, but suffering through it without support is not a requirement. You are allowed to want relief. You are allowed to want sleep. You are allowed to want your mind back. You are allowed to care about your bones, your heart, and your future. And you are allowed to seek a clinician who takes all of that seriously. Do not let outdated fear be the loudest voice in the room. Educate yourself, ask for a real conversation, and reclaim your vitality with science, not shame. Before you act on anything you heard here, remember this. This video is for educational purposes only. Hormone replacement therapy requires an individualized medical evaluation. Always consult with a board-certified endocrinologist, OB/GYN, or qualified menopause practitioner before starting or stopping any hormone treatment, especially if you have a history of hormone receptor-positive cancer. Your body deserves careful care, not fear. And if you want the adrenal and cortisol support blueprint, check the link in the description.